Hi, my name is Lyla and I'm the Mini Witch. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this week's video, I'm going to teach you how to make borax crystals for your terrain pieces. The other day, I came across a really interesting technique of being able to make crystals at home. The tutorial included an ingredient called borax, which is available at almost any home improvement store, and overall seemed pretty dang easy. And thus, Crystal Skull Terrain was born. Supplies. You'll need skulls, toothbrush, paintbrush, primer, paint, borax, string pipe cleaners, pot, 1 cup measure, clear glass jar, pencil, and sealant. First, you will need skulls or whatever else you plan to crystallize. The skulls were purchased off Amazon for probably more than they were actually worth, but it's pretty difficult to get skulls in the summer. Next, you'll need your main ingredient, which is borax. Borax is a type of DIY cleaning supply, often used in homemade cleaning recipes. Borax was also difficult to get. The price was 2 to 3 times as high on Amazon, and I had to call every home improvement store in town to find a place that had it in stock. Borax is a bit of a niche item, so call ahead to make sure that they have it before you head out. On to the project. First, I'm removing the mold lines from these skulls. The mold lines were far more intense than I was expecting, so I had to shave away a lot of plastic to get the area decently smooth. After that, I finished smoothing the skulls with my file. I left the edges rough because it was my hope that the borax would more easily adhere to the rough areas rather than the smooth plastic. Next, I'm cutting my skulls down the middle to make them appear more cohesive with the table and terrain. This will give them the illusion of having been buried in sand for hundreds of years. To make each unique, I'm cutting them at different angles. I recommend cutting less than you think you'll need. The skulls had different thicknesses of plastic depending on what area you were cutting, so it was pretty difficult to get even. So I recommend cutting away your edges slowly, testing it occasionally against the table to make sure that it's going to sit flat. After more research, I realized that the borax probably wasn't going to adhere to the plastic, so I came up with a backup plan. I decided the next best thing would be to give the borax something to grip onto. So I'm drilling holes into the skull, planning on looping thread through the holes to build an armature for my borax to form upon. I'm also drilling holes on the bottom of each side of my skull so that I can loop string in those holes, dangle it off of a stick, and keep it submerged at the height that I want in my jar. Of course, my items floated, so I didn't need to do this, but double check the buoyancy of your item before you move ahead. Attempt 1. Attempt 1 did not go as planned, but I'll explain why later. Mistake 1 was looping the thread the way I did through this skull. I used large swaths of thread, hoping that giving it a larger structure would allow the borax crystals to grow larger. Then I glued down my strings on the inside so they wouldn't go anywhere. Lastly, I cut thread into small bits and glued it sporadically across the skull to give different heights and textures for the borax to grow onto. Now it's on to painting. I quickly gave my skulls a wash with a toothbrush and warm water, which was extremely important. Then I primed it through my airbrush with my Stynylrez primer. Next, using my airbrush, I painted with black from below, a tan in the middle, and then a khaki from above. The idea was to make the skulls look aged, like they had been there for a very long time. I sealed this with a Rust-Oleum gloss varnish. The YouTube tutorial that I was following for this recommended this varnish, and I happened to have it on hand, but perhaps your tester's dull coat or whatever else you would use would also work. Now I'm tying the string through those bottom loops, again with the intent of hanging the skulls from this string. It is extremely important to make sure that your item has enough room in the container because you don't want the crystals to grow and attach to the crystals that are going to grow from the bottom of the container and not be able to remove your item. Now I'm on to making the borax mixture. Like most cleaning agents, borax can be dangerous if you get it in your eyes or ingest it. So make sure that all small children and pets are out of the kitchen when you're doing this project. Borax should be mixed in a 1-to-1 ratio. So 1 cup borax, 1 cup water. I place my 1.5 cups of water into my pot and then 1.5 cups of borax after that. Then I place my pot onto the stove and heat it up. I did research and didn't find anything about borax tainting your cookware, so just make sure you clean it extra thoroughly once you're done, but otherwise I don't think you have anything to worry about. Once the borax began to dissolve completely and the pot began to simmer, it was time to pour it into my containers. Now this is where I made my second mistake. Borax is incredibly finicky, which I did not know when I was starting this. So I highly recommend using a clear mason jar. Colored mason jars affected the borax. Pyrex glass affected the borax. And so I recommend just go to your thrift store, find some clear bell jars, and use those instead. When you look here, you can see the difference between these crystals that were done in the clear bell jar versus the blue bell jar. And here's an example of what happened when I used Pyrex. Anyway, place your mixture into your jars and then put your skulls in after. The secret to big crystals is for your liquid to cool slowly. I covered my jar with a piece of cardboard and placed it off to the side to grow overnight. After 12 hours, remove your skulls and see how they turned out. Once I pulled out the skull, I was in for a bit of surprise. I was not expecting the crystals to so perfectly follow the loops of my string. I trimmed off the odds and ends and began to consider how I could salvage what I had already done. My answer was to use hot glue and glue crystals to my skull to fill in the gaps. I highly recommend hot glue as the clear nature made it look far more realistic. Attempt 2. This time I'm going to be using pipe cleaners, and I'm going to be using them to build a structure that is far more purposeful. I'm also going to build up more ground coverage by creating a spiral pattern with my pipe cleaners so that the crystal has more of a gradation from the top of the skull to those points. Lastly, I'm sculpting a few other random pipe cleaner formations so that I can use them in my terrain later. Unfortunately, the paint began to peel off of this skull. I guess there is a limit to how many times you can dunk a painted skull, and that would be no more than 3. However, I am pretty dang pleased with how the crystals turned out on this one. A few last-minute tips for making borax crystals. You can add color to your crystals by using food coloring. If you're not sure how to tell if you messed up or if it wasn't the right container, look at the bottom of your container and see how big the crystals got on the bottom. If the crystals are pretty low and didn't really take to the container, then you used the wrong container. If your item gets stuck to the bottom or side of your container, you can place the entire thing in boiling water, just enough to cover the crystallized bottom of your jar. The heat will help melt the crystals that has adhered from your object to the jar, and you'll be able to pull the whole thing out with ease. Next, I'm working on the bases. I didn't have any open bases, so I had to cannibalize some pre-existing ones. So this texture was already built on these bases. I did my priming and zenithal highlighting with my airbrush, and then quickly painted these with contrast paints. Once the contrast paints were dry, I began to do dry brushing, slowly building up to a brighter and brighter color while pressing lighter and lighter on the object so that the brightest highlights were only located on the texture that was raised the most. Then I took some pigment from Green Stuff World and applied that to my base as well. Then I decided that I wanted to carefully paint in some shadows on my skulls. In the whole crystallizing process, I kind of lost some of the intensity. So taking black ink, I sprayed from below and carefully re-intensified those shadows. Now it's on to gluing down my skulls and other last-minute details. I used the blackest black in the eye sockets, as well as painting in other cracks and chips and other areas that will make the skull look more realistic. To further sell that the skulls are buried in the desert, I'm taking super glue and applying a ring around my skulls, then taking sand, placing that on top of the super glue. To make it so that this raised edges blends more in with the base, I'm going to then do another round of super glue and then apply baking soda to get that smoother, more natural texture. Then I'm going to go back in and paint that to match my base. Once I was done, I applied more of my red pigment with a makeup brush to the base and skull. This last little bit helped to combine the skull and base so they appeared as if they had grown old and worn together. Lastly, it's time to seal my models with that Rust-Oleum gloss sealant. Overall, I'm pretty dang happy. I'm burnt out, I'm never doing this again, but I'm hoping that this video will inspire you, and the fact that I've already worked out all the kinks for you will also make you feel more confident in moving forward and doing your own borax crystals. If you follow this tutorial, I would love to see what you create. I came up with crystal skulls, but I'm sure that there are a million other things that you could do with this technique, and I would love to see them. So if you follow this, please feel free to tag me on Instagram so I can see it. If you would like to support me and my channel, you can subscribe down below, support me on Patreon, or purchase literally anything you want through the Amazon affiliate links in my description. It doesn't cost you anything extra, it's just a little bit extra for me. I hope that you are doing well. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.